Hi, I'm Edward Barrow from Stanley Gibbons Auctions. Today I brought along a small collection of postal history. I just wanted to sort of show the range and the topics that can be covered by postal history. The Panama Canal was a prestige project for the United States. It was a little bit like the moon landing was in the 1950s and 1960s. It was going to be something that the US could get its teeth into, prove its mettle, apply its ingenuity and innovative new techniques, and do something that was thought impossible. So it was a major project at that point in time. The problem they had was they didn't have enough labor. Now that's where the British West Indies came in. They had a large pool of labor that was underemployed. This relates to the collapse of the sugar industry in the 1800s, and they didn't find any other viable economic model to replace that. So the United States, to fill this demand for labor, set up agencies in the islands. In fact, the majority of the workers came from the British West Indies, particularly Barbados. I think about 20,000 of the workers came from Barbados, which may not sound a lot, but it's about 10% of the actual population and about 40% of the male working population. So it was a massive drain on Barbados in particular, but the other islands also had large numbers of people, who emigrated to Panama to build the Panama Canal. And in some ways, they sort of got written out of history. So this is a postcard, and it's titled "Barbadian Laborers Embarking for the Isthmus of Panama." It's quite a mouthful, and it shows a mass of people on the waterfront in Barbados by a building that has the United States flag. That's probably one of the agencies. So it was a postcard that was, telling the story of Barbadians going to build the Panama Canal. And the interesting thing about using postcards is they also have messages on the back. And this particular one has a message which actually comments about the Barbadian laborers who went to the Panama Canal. And it's written by somebody from the United States. So he goes on to say, our government took thousands of them to work on the canal, and they were the best help they got, which I think says it all. And here we have another postcard. This one, the main interest is on the front. So it has a smaller picture inlaid, which says "Paying Jamaican Laborers," and it also has a scene of the massive construction of one of the blasting zones, which again, a lot of that dangerous work was done by British West Indians, which is not really quite known. One of the more interesting things about looking at postal history going into Panama was that these laborers wanted to stay in touch with their folks back home. So one of the ways they did it was by getting newspapers sent to them. So here I have a couple of what we call newspaper wrappers. Now this is something that's modern times we would never see it. But in the old days, newspapers were the internet, TV, and radio all rolled into one. There was no other alternative for getting information. So there was a cheap way of actually sending newspapers. So it was called a newspaper wrapper. And what you would do is you would get your newspaper. Here I have a copy of the Metro with crossword. You would wrap it up. You could put your address on the front here, and it sort of stuck together and formed a wrapper around it, and you could post it. And it was a really cheap way of doing it. So these ones here actually are only half a penny to send a newspaper to Panama. And these two came from Trinidad. The interesting thing about this one is they probably tried to sneak some correspondence in the newspaper that was against regulations, so they had to pay a little bit more. And the stamps on the front tell that story, that they were probably sneaking in a letter. The clerk saw it and then said, hey, you have to pay a little bit more. So they had to pay 2.5 pence more. You can also find registered mail or letters going in. They're quite hard to find, but they are out there. This one here is a registered letter, again from Trinidad, going into Panama to a worker there. So the West Indians that went out to build the canal didn't only have to face dangerous work conditions and disease, they also faced a system that was oppressive. There was this system of what was called the silver roll and the gold roll. Basically, unskilled workers, who were largely black, were paid in silver, and the white workers were paid in gold. And this became a sort of a demarcation system for oppression, basically. And what happened was that the gold-rolled workers had better housing, better food, better working conditions, and obviously the silver-rolled workers did not. They had cramped conditions, they weren't allowed to bring their wives, if I remember correctly, and they had a whole system of division there. Even the post office was divided. You had separate lines for gold workers, separate lines for silver workers. So this oppressive system, it wasn't lost on the workers. They knew exactly what it was. So here I have a letter that was written to a newspaper in Trinidad. It's from somebody who went in good faith to the Panama Canal and was working there. And he's writing to a newspaper to warn the residents to not come here. So at the head of the letter, he says, Trinidad, bid your people to go to hell rather than come to the isthmus, unless the present commission be changed. So in the letter, he goes on to describe some of the injustices that they suffer. And it's really quite moving and quite poignant. One of the other interesting things that come up in the letter is that the letter writer, is also undergoing a sort of a political change. He's starting to see himself differently. Because in it, he describes himself not as a Trinidadian, he describes himself as an Ethiopian, which is really quite remarkable, because it means that in this cauldron that he's in, he's starting to reimagine himself due to the harsh conditions that he's in. And he's identifying himself as an Ethiopian. To me, this strikes a chord with later developments in the Caribbean, with the Rastafarian movement, which I think was in the 1930s it came into being, sort of. And this is almost a precursor to that, and quite an interesting one. And it's one of those interesting sort of things that can come out from studying postal history, is that you actually come in contact with real history, and you can actually read things that are written by real people in real time, and experience what they are experiencing, albeit via a literary format.